evolution level down, and we have done some really excellent job there. I will not go too long, but I will just shortly say that one more thing, that for Estonia, the energy sector has been one of the big emitting sector, and we have also seen very rapid and very big and very good changes in the energy sector. We are now very rapidly moving towards more renewable energy producing. So the amount of fossil energy is going down quite rapidly, and the amount of renewable is growing rapidly, which for a small country is also very important.
One more question. We'll start with just take one.
Thank you very much. Monica Richter, I'm from the Australian Conservation Foundation. So thank you very much. It was a very enlightened talk. I would be interested to understand more, who was it? How did your country come to have the mindset to adopt the policies that we did 20 years ago? Was we getting advice from outside, or how did that come about?
Thank you for the question. To explain very shortly is quite challenging. Easy answer would be that it's Estonian character. We are very not greedy, but let's say that we during the centuries we have believed that you can spend as much as you earn yourself. And it is true when it comes to fiscal policy. So we have had during the years, we have had also now when we are in the EU, and when we had our own currency, we have had the lowest debt burden, and we have always had the budget with the surplus, which means that why I'm explaining is just to explain the attitude. So we have always, the austerity is our thing. And since it is so with the financial policy or with the economical issues, it should be exactly the same when it comes to the environmental issues. Just as I tried to explain, if we see now during the crisis what happens to the countries who have spent more they had and who have whose debt burden has grown in an enormous space. It's exactly the same with the environmental. If you use the resources, natural resources more than you can actually do, more than the nature can reproduce during the year, then the same thing will happen in the environmental field. I mean, when it comes to the financial world, then okay, we have the EFSF in Eurozone, we have the big programs there, we see the bailouts, but I don't know, maybe one of you can answer who can bail out the nature. You cannot bail out. So this has been the philosophy behind it, and yeah, I think we are quite lucky that it has been this way. And it's also, we do see that also when you notice how important is the very careful use of resources in everyday lives, then also finally you see that actually it helps you to cut the costs also for every living in the long run. And actually this long run is not for the centuries, but it can be, you can see it through the years. So it's also a very direct benefit for everyday life. Thank you.
So please join me in thanking the Minister very much for your contribution. I think it's extremely fortunate to come to the workshop and be willing to share some of the insights into how Estonia has managed to come from a difficult history and in a relatively short period of time develop a new economy. So I'd like to now invite our next speaker, who is Asim, and we're talking on, you will tell us what you're talking about.
Good morning, everyone. right place to start might be with something which the Honorable Minister has just said, which is we spend a lot of time grappling with the consequences. We don't spend a lot of time and diagnose the causes that way. And part of the rationale for this workshop, I think, is that we try to explore in some depth the causes of the massive challenges that we face today. And I think in order to do that, you have to get into a degree of political economy and economics. And so that's what Alejandro and I will do today. The place where we will start is actually to try to diagnose the crisis, the last word that I think you see there. And where we start is by actually characterizing the present economic and financial crisis as a second-grade depression. It's that serious. So the first question we try to answer is what has led us to this point. I'll cover that in the first part of this workshop. After that, Alejandro will come in and talk about the assumptions of the policy framework that goes under what was called neoliberalism. Then I'll come back and discuss some of the socio-economic and ecological consequences of the neoliberal framework. And finally, Alejandro will come back again and talk about what sort of policy reform measures might we think of as stemming as lessons from the crisis that the world faces. So we're beginning with a sort of very brief outline or sketch. Some of it will be a bit technical, and in case you don't follow something, please just raise your hand and stop me right home. We have time to go into some important concepts to make sense of what's going on. So the place where I start is 1971, and a very important economic event happens in August of 1971, which is that the American Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, refuses to convert dollars held by foreigners, especially Japanese and Germans, into gold. So this is a very important point because the whole system of international exchange, international monetary system, which goes by the name of Bretton Woods, having been constituted in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire in 1944, that sort of came undone in August 1971. And this was a system of exchange rates which were fixed in relation to each other. So a fixed exchange rate system broke down when the US Federal Reserve refused to convert dollars into gold. What this did was to essentially set currencies free from any sort of peg outside the world of currencies. And the dollar became the de facto reserve currency. Now what I mean by that is this. Let's say you are a Japanese exporter of Toyota cars to the US in 1971. And you have a whole bunch of dollars from your sale of Toyotas. And you keep accumulating these dollars because your cars are selling in the US. You accumulate what economists call a trade surplus. Right? At some point you begin to get a bit restive with so many dollars. You want to convert it into something else. You want to know what this is worth. And you go to the American Central Bank and you say, can you please convert X number of these into gold? And they say, no, we can't. And you refuse to do that. But that makes you suspicious of the credibility of the dollar, the currency you are trying to get rid of. So that's essentially what happened. The credibility of the dollar comes into question for the first time in 1971. And many economic historians therefore describe the period before this as Pax Americana. And what follows after that is some decline in American competitiveness and economic strength. So that's a very important sort of baseline point to bear in mind. 1971, the breakdown of Bretton Woods, the loss of the strength of the dollar, and much that happened over the next 40 years, up until today, what we describe in this presentation as neoliberalism is, or some people call it globalization, is actually coming out of the failure of the American economy to actually maintain its service value. This is a point which people don't normally understand, which is that globalization is actually born of a certain systemic failure of the US system. What is neoliberalism? For those of us who might be a bit unfamiliar with the term, so withdrawal of the state from economic affairs. Normally, you can't imagine any modern economy, capitalist or any other, actually running without a massive amount of presence of the state. The state is necessary for all sorts of things. Neoliberalism is a sort of doctrinal belief that you need to get out, the state needs to withdraw, keep just minimal presence in the economy. It's the introduction of sort of classical liberalism, which is a few centuries older, we believe in free trade and so on. And very importantly, from an economic historian's point of view, many of the lessons of the last Great Depression, which is the 1930s, which were best taught by the economist John Maynard Keynes, many of those lessons which involve profound levels of government intervention in the economy, those lessons were set aside in the neoliberal era. So the last point here, I've just said something about that it comes out of the failure to run itself, the system to run itself. What I did not say was that there's also an unjust distribution of income and wealth, which lies behind the failure of the system to run itself. And this becomes clear a bit later on, when you start looking at what happens to the real wages that workers are earning. And you start realizing that sometime from the mid-70s onwards in the Western world, real wages start to stagnate, right? However, the overall system needs to sell. The capitalism can't survive without selling a growing volume of products. Who are they going to sell to if you don't pay workers enough? So the old sort of Henry Ford belief that you've got to pay your workers well in order to get them to buy the cars, that's it. So the invention of the 1970s is consumer debt, especially after the rise of credit cards, right? And what you find happening is something very interesting. For some reason, the graphs which we put here have disappeared. Anyway, what we have in the graphs, I want you to imagine this now. There is a line going roughly like that, which indicates how real wages are growing over time. And there's a line growing like this, which shows what is happening to consumer debt since about the 1970s, right? There's a growing gap between wages and debt. So what's happening? Think about this. What's happening is this. You're paying workers less and less in real terms, and you're getting them to buy more and more in real terms. How do you do that? You sell them debt. So that's why we call it double whammy for workers. Now this is crucial to understand because this is at the root of a lot of problems which have led to the financial crisis and the consequent problems for human society and environment in general. So if you are not managing income distribution properly, it's not just a problem of social injustice, which it is. It's also a systemic issue in terms of running the system healthily. The capitalist system cannot run healthily, it can be distributed income somewhat fairly. If you don't do that, then you have to have some other compensation mechanism. And what they did was to invent consumer debt. So you pay the workers less and you saddle them with more debt. And you invite them into the sort of top floor of the economy, as it were, high levels of consumption, and raise their aspirations and so on. Over a period of time, obviously, the debt is going to debt. The other thing which I want you to think about is when you actually break out of the fixed exchange rate system and you move towards a flexible exchange rate system, and exchange rates can fluctuate. vis-a-vis each other. Now, this is when financial speculators met blood in the 1970s because they felt they could hoard a certain amount of the country's currency when it was selling cheap and then sell it when it was selling dear. Simple. Right? What do you achieve in the process? You gain what is called in the language arbitrage. So there's lots of arbitrage opportunities which proliferate once you allow currencies to fluctuate. And then the financiers and speculators and investors and banks, what they started doing was they started pushing for deregulating a whole set of financial laws which had kept speculative finance in check since the 1930s. So a whole legislative framework which had actually arisen out of a lot of hard experience, bitter experience, that started coming undone after the 1970s. So you had these loan sharks. Would go to third world countries, Argentina, Venezuela, Brazil, Mexico, and so on, and sell loans to third world governments, especially those that would accumulate in banks first as deposits of petrodollars coming from Arab countries after the oil crisis and so on. So banks exist in order to make loans, otherwise they can't survive and make profits. And so they did aggressive loan pushing and pushed a lot of loans onto other countries. So capital begins looking for profitable opportunities outside some mainstream areas, and then that's when it gets into finance. And also, as I mentioned here, it goes into areas like social services, health, education, social security, and so on. Because again, the problem is if you're not paying your workers enough, okay, your industrial economy will stagnate to a degree. And then you can get certain loans, but you also look for other profitable opportunities. The next point, which I've already discussed a bit, the origins of the international debt crisis also lie in the same financial liberalization which begins after the 1970s. And you have third world countries accumulating huge amounts of debt, many of which we now describe as odious debt. And this debt is accumulated because money is on the tap. Because of liberalization of finance, banks are allowed to create more and more money, create more and more financial instruments, which are then let loose on the world, so to speak. So the volatility in exchange rates, the fluctuations in exchange rates become both cause and effect of intensified financial crisis. The markets trump the economy. So if you see the pink pages, in the business pages, the financial markets, the financial sector is described as the markets, and the rest of the economy is known as the economy, which is strange in itself. But when you think about it, it's actually not so strange, it's very serious, which is that all policy making after the 1970s, and I'm going to speak more about this, all policy making starts getting focused towards keeping financial markets happy. Okay? And as that happens, industry and agriculture become basically enabling conditions for business and free markets the world over. And this trend accelerates after the end of communism in 1989, when globalization has a free run on the world. Right? Collateral damage, growing degradation of nature and the environment after the 1980s. If you read the assessments, the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment of United Nations, IPCC reports, and many other documents we refer to, there's an acceleration of environmental damage after the mid-1980s or so. There's a trend. A lot of the environmental legislation in many parts of the world, especially the United States and India, where I come from, starts getting dismantled or diluted, at least after the mid-1980s or so. Again, this is about capital looking for profitable opportunities outside the mainstream industrial sector. Natural wilderness areas get opened up. This competitive search for land, water, and energy, natural resources, which intensifies once globalization takes off in the 1990s. So you have what we know to be the race to the bottom, so really accelerating after that. Now, the crisis itself. Since 2007, I want to say a little bit about that. First of all, this is a crisis of the system as a whole. This is not a sectoral crisis. It's not because of slowdown in this or that industry. It's not because of absence of innovation in this or that sector. It's not because state spending has somehow gotten out of hand on its own, as some pundits would have us believe. Nor is it some external shock to the system as it was in the 1970s, where there were two major oil crises. This is something coming out of the internal dynamics of the system. This is the way the system works. Capitalism is a crisis-driven system. And many of us might think that crisis is a problem for capitalism. Actually, it's not. As long as you can make money from that crisis, by all means use it as an opportunity. Right? So the crisis is an opportunity in disguise from a purely financial investor's perspective. It was a long time in the making, and as I discussed earlier, inequality is a key factor in the making of the crisis. So once again, I want to emphasize that inequality is not just a matter of social justice. It is a matter of social justice, of course. It's also that to run the system properly, you need to distribute economic wealth reasonably. If it becomes too slanted, too lopsided, this is something that